Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into something, well, truly mysterious. We're pulling back the curtain on the Nephilim myth. You know those figures from Genesis? Giants, fallen angels, lots of intrigue.
Definitely. There's so much speculation around them.
Right. So our mission today is to unpack all that complexity. We're using a specific source, Samuel Delgado's The Nephilim Myth, which takes a really critical look, offers a fresh perspective.
Yeah, it's a great source. Delgado dives deep into Genesis 6, but with careful textual work, which is refreshing for such a sensationalized topic.
And what makes it really hit home, I think, is the author's own story. Delgado talks about how he first got interested. And it's probably pretty relatable.
Yeah, how so?
Through YouTube, basically.
Yeah.
Suggested videos led him to what he calls weird Christian content.
Okay. Like what?
End time stuff, conspiracies, Illuminati, the works. He even mentioned seeing these slideshows of faked giant skeleton photos.
Oh, right, those. Yeah, I've seen things like that.
Exactly. He later realized they were way bigger than anything the Bible describes, but at the time, he was totally hooked.
Wow, so that was the spark, even though it was based on fakes.
Seems like it. We got him fascinated with the angelic view, the idea that fallen angels and women had these, well, giant offspring.
Yeah.
The Nephilim.
But he struggled with that, the idea of angels procreating.
He did. He admits it was hard to accept, but he couldn't find another explanation for the giants that, satisfied him at the time.
Interesting. So he's grappling with this idea.
Yeah, and get this. He was also listening to Hank Hanegraaff, the Bible answer man, who was pushing the Sethite view.
Oh, okay. So complete opposite interpretations. That must have been confusing.
Totally. He talked about that confusion. How did he navigate that with all this other stuff pulling him towards the angelic view?
Well, that's the thing, right? That tension seems key. He says he dove even deeper into other podcasts, other authors, people talking about aliens, end times predictions.
And this stuff reinforced the angelic view.
It sounds like it did, yeah. It became this kind of gateway into what he calls special knowledge, stuff not usually talked about in church.
Right, that lure of hidden or forbidden knowledge is powerful. He mentions names like Michael Heiser, whose scholarly work actually made him feel more confident in the angelic view for a while.
Yeah, Heiser's work is definitely influential in those circles.
And it got pretty extreme for Delgado. He says he even briefly entertained the serpent seed idea.
Wow, the idea that Cain was literally Satan's kid.
Yeah, and he visited a cult associated with William Branham. It really shows how far you can drift, the potential downsides of chasing these fringe theories.
Absolutely. It highlights a real danger. Did he stick with the cult?
No, he moved away from that, thankfully.
Yeah.
But critically, he still held on to the angelic view of the Nephilim, even after rejecting the really extreme stuff.
So that core belief remained.
It did. The conflict was still there. So much so, he actually called into the Bible Answer Man program to challenge Hanegraaff.
No way. He actually did that.
Yep. Said he felt a bit foolish afterwards, but he was just determined to get solid answers.
That's commitment.
And for years, the angelic view held strong. Even his own pastor, a conservative Southern Baptist, preached the angelic view once. That gave it a lot of weight for him.
Wow. Okay, so reinforcement from multiple directions.
Exactly. But then, much later, like 2021, 2022, when he had his own podcast and started teaching Bible in a high school, doubt started creeping in.
Okay. So this is where the shift begins.
Right, and it sets up the core debate we want to explore. The angelic view versus the Sethite view. That aha moment for him came from his students.
Right, let's get into that. The classroom experience sounds like it was pivotal, teaching Genesis 6 to kids who didn't really have preconceived notions.
Yeah, exactly. So he walked them through Genesis 4 and 5 first. Cain's line, Seth's line, these distinct groups emerging.
Setting the context. Makes sense.
Then he presented the different views on Genesis 6 and asked them basically what they thought fit best with what they just read.
And the result?
Overwhelmingly, they leaned towards the Sethite view, without him pushing them, without mentioning Enoch or giants or anything like that.
Wow. Just based on Genesis itself.
Exactly. And that was his big realization. He saw that without leaning on those outside sources, Enoch, the questionable photos, anecdotes, the angelic view was actually pretty hard to pull just from Genesis 1 through 6.
Okay, that's a huge insight. So the Sethite view felt more grounded in the immediate text.
That's what he concluded, yeah. Its strength was his connection to the context of the intermarriage in chapter 6, flowing directly from the lineages described right before it in 4 and 5.
Right, it keeps the focus on the human story unfolding there.
Whereas the angelic view, in that classroom setting, felt a bit strained. He mentioned its best biblical defense often involved jumping to Job.
Which felt forced and out of place, he said.
Yeah, within the flow of Genesis. And crucially, there's just no mention of angels rebelling or falling or anything like that in Genesis 6 itself. It's just not there.
That's a strong point, based purely on the text.
So let's dig into these two views more formally. Starting with the angelic view and Delgado's critique. The basic claim is sons of God, fallen angels, daughters of men, human women, Nephilim, giant hybrids.
And proponents argue it explains giants and why the flood was supposedly necessary, this unique corruption.
Right. But Delgado's analysis of Genesis 3 to 6 challenges this. He emphasizes how the text consistently sets up human distinctions like the son-man distinction and the lineage distinction. It's all about human genealogies and moral choices.
So the focus is firmly terrestrial on humanity.
Which makes the complete absence of any talk about angels in Genesis 6 really stand out. It suggests the story is about humans interacting with humans.
Okay. What about the biological aspect, angels and humans?
He tackles that too. Questions the whole premise. How do spiritual beings physically procreate with humans? He talks about the limitations of the angels and the fundamental principles of the creation of life. It raises serious questions.
Yeah, that's always been a sticky point for that view.
And then there's the flood. Delgado argues that if angels could just, do it again after the flood, a second incursion, wouldn't that make the flood kind of pointless?
A failure, essentially. Implying God's big cleansing didn't really cleanse that specific problem.
Exactly, which seems to contradict the narrative of the flood as a definitive cleansing.
Okay. Any other textual points?
Yeah, the conquest of Canaan. When the Israelites are told to destroy the inhabitants, the reasons given are idolatry, wickedness.
But no mention of them being like leftover angel-human hybrids.
None. There's a lack of hybrid talk.
Yeah.
If that was the core issue, you'd expect it to be front and center in the reasons for destruction, but it's not.
That's another significant silence in the text.
And a big part of his critique targets the Book of Enoch, since it's so foundational for the angelic view.
Right. What's his take on Enoch?
He questions its dating and authorship, points out internal contradictions and falsehoods, and basically says using it to interpret Genesis 6 is a poor hermeneutic, a flawed interpretative method.
So relying on a later, non-canonical text to explain Genesis is problematic for him.
Very. He addresses the fact that Jude quotes Enoch and their other New Testament allusions.
Yeah, people always bring those up.
But he questions if those references are a full endorsement of Enoch's entire story as factual history, or more like referencing a well-known cultural narrative without necessarily validating every detail. Like quoting a popular saying today doesn't mean you endorse its origin wholeheartedly.
Gotcha. It's a common literary device referencing shared stories.
Okay, so turning to the Sethite view, the claim here is sons of God, godly line of Seth, daughters of men, ungodly line of Cain. Nephilim, mighty men, perhaps powerful or infamous humans born from this forbidden union, not hybrids.
And Delgado sees strengths here.
Big time. Primarily its contextual coherence. It fits seamlessly with the theme of forbidden intermarriage found elsewhere in the Bible. Genesis 6 becomes a direct consequence of the human lineages set up right before it.
So it reads more naturally within Genesis itself. No need to jump to Job or Enoch immediately.
Exactly. And the theological implications are powerful too. It highlights God's holiness and his concern about his people mixing with ungodliness, leading to corruption. It keeps the focus on human responsibility and sin.
Rather than blaming it all on angels from outside.
Right. And if it's a broader narrative pattern he sees, the fall in the garden, land, and world pattern, Genesis 6 becomes another step in humanity's fall from grace through disobedience, echoing Eden, human sin spreading.
So it's part of a consistent biblical theme about human choices and consequences.
Yeah. And ultimately, its strength is its consistency. It doesn't need those outside sources like Enoch for a first-time reader to make sense of the basic story in Genesis.
It stands on its own, textually.
Which brings us to why this matters. Delgado really hammers this home. What we believe about the Nephilim has consequences. This isn't just splitting hairs over ancient words.
Right. It affects how you see everything that follows. The flood, the conquest of Canaan, even your view of God himself.
Totally. If the flood was about wiping out hybrids, but they seemingly pop up again, what does that say about God's plan or power?
Versus if it's about pervasive human sin resulting from disobeying God's implied desire for separation between the godly and ungodly lines, that paints a different picture of divine justice and human failure.
Exactly. It really shifts your whole interpretive lens for the Old Testament.
And Delgado mentions he struggled to find resources arguing against the angelic view when he started questioning it.
Yeah, he felt the angelic view dominated the popular conversation, especially online. That lack of accessible counterarguments was a big reason he wrote the book. He wanted to be a resource for people wrestling with this.
And his background, having been so deep in that angelic view world.
Makes him uniquely positioned, right? He understands the appeal, why it grabs people. But he also sees it now as potentially a big distraction from the Bible's main themes.
So wrapping this up, we've looked at the two main views, angelic versus Sethite.
One heavily reliant on outside texts and interpretations. The other finding its strength right there in the context of Genesis.
And the author's own journey really highlights that process of questioning, digging into the text, and realizing how much assumptions can shape what we see.
It's a call to critical thinking, really. To look closely at the sources themselves.
Yeah, to ask, what does the text actually say versus what have I heard about the text? Makes you reconsider how you approach these foundational stories.
So we'll leave you with a thought from Delgado, kind of summing up his hope. He says, I hope an honest look at Scripture can give you the freedom I found in discovering the Nephilim myth.
Finding freedom and clarity and letting the text guide the interpretation.
It's a powerful idea. And maybe it prompts you to think about how you approach not just this text, but any complex information where popular narratives might overshadow the source itself. Something to chew on.